Forensic medicine was supposed to reveal the truth, but a corrupt coroner used his knowledge to hide crimes. For years, he manipulated reports, altered evidence, and covered up deaths that should never have been forgotten. Until a mistake exposed his secret and triggered an investigation that put his life at risk. What did the police find? Who wanted to silence him? And why was his body never found? Sit back, put on your headphones and prepare for a realistic and disturbing story. The Guadalajara Legal Medical Institute was one of the busiest in the state. The smell of formaldehyde permeated the environment, and the narrow corridors were always cold, maintaining the appropriate temperature for the bodies awaiting examination. Dr. Manuel Herrera knew that place well. At 64 years old and with more than 3 decades of experience, he was a reference in forensic medicine. He was respected by his colleagues, admired by his interns and, above all, trusted by those who needed convenient reports. For years, Herrera operated discreetly inside the morgue, manipulating documents and changing causes of death to favor certain groups. It was a risky but highly profitable service. Overdose reports in homicide victims, falsified certificates to hide crimes, and even the accelerated release of bodies that would never undergo a complete autopsy. Few people questioned his methods. After all, he was an experienced, meticulous and, for many, incorruptible man. In the early hours of August 16, 2009, a new body arrived at the morgue. Luis Alberto Sanchez, 27 years old, found lifeless in an alley in the city. According to the police report, it was a heroin overdose, something common in the region. The paperwork was already done, and all that was needed was for Herrera to confirm the cause of death. With a tired sigh, he signed the document before even starting the exam. The following morning, the body would be sent for cremation and the case closed. However, while preparing the corpse for release, he noticed something strange. There were bruises on her wrists, marks on her neck and small cuts on her fingers. None of this matched a simple overdose. He hesitated for a moment, but then ignored the evidence. It wasn't his job to question. After all, the money was already secured, and the last thing he wanted was to raise suspicions. He placed the body back on the stretcher and continued with his routine. The next morning, a young forensic assistant named Miguel Ortega organized the records of the bodies that would be sent for cremation. Among the papers, he found Luis Sanchez's file and noticed something strange. The report said the autopsy had been completed, but there was no toxicology analysis recorded in the system. Suspicious, Miguel accessed the security cameras and reviewed the recordings from the previous night. What he saw made his heart race. The images showed Herrera moving the body hurriedly, trying to position it in a specific way. Then, he took a scalpel and made a small cut on the victim's arm. Miguel knew that this was not standard procedure. He felt a chill run down his spine. Something was very wrong. Wasting no time, he discreetly called his supervisor and showed him the recording. The police were called immediately. Hours before the cremation, agents arrived at the morgue with an order to suspend the procedure and reopen the examination. Herrera watched everything in silence, sweat running down his forehead. For the first time in years, he felt the real weight of his actions. When the new examination was carried out, the results were shocking. There were no traces of heroin in the victim's blood. Luis Alberto Sanchez had not died of an overdose. He had been asphyxiated. The case that should have been closed without question now became a criminal investigation. And the main suspect was not only the killer, but also the man who tried to cover it all up. The atmosphere at the Guadalajara Legal Medical Institute changed drastically after the discovery. What was once a cold and routine environment has turned into an epicenter of investigations and tension. The next day, police officers arrived at the morgue to question staff, and the previously silent hallways were now filled with whispers and suspicious glances. Dr. Manuel Herrera, however, maintained his firm stance. For him, this was nothing more than a setback. It wasn't the first time suspicions had arisen about his work, and he always knew how to protect himself. Luis Alberto Sanchez's body was taken for a complete examination at an independent laboratory, and the results were irrefutable. He had not died from an overdose, but rather from mechanical asphyxiation. The absence of heroin in his blood and the bruises on his wrists and neck indicated that he had been immobilized before he died. Someone tried to turn a murder into a case of accidental death, and Herrera signed a false report to cover it all up. The revelation came as a shock inside the morgue. Herrera realized that the situation was becoming untenable when he received a formal request to testify at the police station. Until that moment, he still believed he could overcome the situation, but something in his intuition warned him that this case was different. The presence of the investigators, the seriousness with which they analyzed every detail and the way in which the young assistant Miguel Ortega watched him from afar made an uncomfortable feeling come over him. That night he couldn't sleep. Voices from the past came back to his mind. How many cases had he handled over the years? How many bodies have passed through your hands and been dismissed as numbers in a report? For decades, he believed he was untouchable, protected by the respect of his colleagues and the secrecy of his transactions. But now, a simple mistake threatened to destroy everything. The next morning, when he arrived at the morgue, he found his office sealed and a forensic team analyzing his files. Herrera felt a chill down his spine when he realized that the police were not just investigating the case of Luis Alberto Sanchez. They were reviewing all your previous reports. It was a matter of time before they found other altered cases. The silence in the place was overwhelming. His colleagues avoided looking in his direction, and Miguel Ortega, the young man who found the recording, now walked through the morgue as if he were truly responsible for unmasking it. He knew his reputation was destroyed. In the following days, the police's questions began to become more incisive. They wanted to know who paid it, how payments were made, what other cases had been manipulated. Herrera refused to answer anything without a lawyer present, but inside he knew the only way out was to disappear before things got worse. It was then that he made a desperate decision. That night, while investigators were still reviewing documents and taking statements, Herrera discreetly left through the back door of the morgue. Sweat ran down his face as he walked hurriedly through the streets of Guadalajara. His plan was simple: flee the city before the police had concrete evidence against him. But he never reached his destination. The next morning, his car was found abandoned on a road on the outskirts of the city. The driver's seat was covered in blood. There were no signs of a struggle, just a single gunshot mark on the side window. Manuel Herrera's body was never found. The days following Manuel Herrera's disappearance were marked by chaos and uncertainty. The Guadalajara Legal Medical Institute became the target of a deeper investigation, and employees, once accustomed to ignoring rumors about the veteran coroner, were now forced to face the reality that they had been working alongside a criminal for years. Meanwhile, authorities pored over the evidence left behind, trying to decipher what really happened the night he disappeared. Herrera's car was found in the early hours of August 18, 2019, parked on a deserted stretch of road about 40 kilometers from the city. The side window was shattered by a single gunshot, and the driver's seat was covered in blood, but no trace of his body was found. The police's first theory was that Herrera, realizing he was about to be arrested, had simulated an attack to throw off investigators and buy time to escape. However, as experts analyzed the crime scene, this hypothesis began to seem less likely. The amount of blood in the car suggested a serious injury. If he had been shot and fled on foot, there would be tracks, footprints, signs of a struggle. But there was nothing. No witnesses, no nearby security cameras, no indication that anyone had run from the scene. What once appeared to be a case of medical corruption now turned into something much bigger. While investigators were trying to understand what happened, a name emerged in the investigation: Luis Alberto Sanchez, the victim whose report Herrera falsified. The 27-year-old, found dead in a Guadalajara alley, had allegedly suffered an overdose, but a new autopsy revealed that he had been asphyxiated. Upon further searching, the police discovered that Sanchez wasn't just any addict. His name had already appeared in several investigations into the Jalisco cartel, and there were suspicions that he was an intermediate-level operator within the criminal organization. If this were true, his death could have been an internal execution. This information completely changed the direction of the investigation. If Sanchez was truly linked to a cartel, then someone paid Herrera to change the cause of death in the official report. This meant that the coroner was not just involved in administrative corruption, but rather directly linked to a network of cover-ups for criminals. Researchers now had a new theory: Herrera did not disappear. He was eliminated. His years of handling reports made him a valuable man to many people. But now that the police were about to arrest him, he became a liability. Someone who knew too much, who could reveal dangerous names and connections. For those who benefited from his silence, Herrera on the loose was an ally. Stuck, it was a problem that needed to be solved. In the following days, the police followed new leads. Anonymous statements indicated that, on the night of the disappearance, a black car with no license plates was seen parked near the location where Herrera's vehicle was found. Another witness reported that, hours before disappearing, the coroner had made a quick call to an unknown number. When agents traced the call, they discovered it had been made to a burner phone, making it impossible to identify the recipient. The evidence suggested that Herrera knew he was in danger. He tried to run away, but somehow it was intercepted before it could disappear on its own. But the mystery didn't end there. Without a body, police were unable to officially close the case. For months, investigators followed new leads, but none led to a concrete outcome. Some people believed he was alive, hiding in another state or even another country, protected by powerful people. Others, more skeptical, were sure that he was eliminated and his body discarded in a way that would never be found. The rumors only grew when, years later, a farmer on the outskirts of Guadalajara found human bones buried in an isolated area. The police were called and the remains were sent for analysis. For weeks, experts tried to confirm whether they belonged to the missing former coroner. However, the tests never yielded a definitive result. The uncertainty caused Manuel Herrera's case to become one of the most intriguing disappearances in Guadalajara's criminal history. Over time, the investigation was shelved. Without a body and without concrete evidence, the case ended up being forgotten. But even years later, his name was still mentioned in forensic medicine and organized crime circles. Some claimed that he was killed and buried in one of the cartel's clandestine cemeteries. Others said that he was forced to continue working behind the scenes, manipulating reports for a criminal group, away from the eyes of the authorities. But the most disturbing version said that, on silent nights in the corridors of the Legal Medical Institute, some employees still heard footsteps echoing alone in the morgue. A slow, shuffling sound coming from one of the old, sealed offices. As if, somehow, Manuel Herrera's legacy was still present in that place.